Hey, I just wanted to drop a quick spoiler warning for this video. Um, this one's going to be talking about some stuff in the manga, not too much, but sort of leading up to chapter 1080, a lot of the concepts throughout the Wano arc. So if you're not caught up with that, I'd rather you click off this video than be spoiled. I'd much rather nobody view these videos than a single person get spoiled because of me. I think that the journey of One Piece and the experience of going through it chapter by chapter or episode by episode, if you're inclined, is much better than having it be spoiled to you on the internet. So with that said, thanks for watching, and let's get on with the video. Haki, literally translating to ambition or aspiration, is a manifestation of one's spirit or willpower in some shape or form. From what I've seen, the characters that make up Haki in Japanese come from Ha, referring to hegemony or dominance in terms of supremacy over a nation, and Ki, derived from the notion of Chi in Asian cultures, in the sense of energy or a vital force. In the world of One Piece, there are three overarching colors or types of Haki: color of observation, color of armament, and the color of the Supreme King, or color of the Conqueror. Across the fandom, there are various ways of referring to the types of Haki. This is largely informed by how you engage with the source material and your given community of fans. Some use their Japanese names. Others use the Viz and current Funimation subs translations. Some use the Funimation dub translations, and some even just use abbreviations. Despite not engaging with the anime too much, I tend to use the Funimation dub convention, as it feels to me the most succinct, and that's how I'll be referring to various types of Haki throughout this video. However, this isn't to say one is necessarily more correct than another, and most fans will understand what you mean regardless of how you refer to them. I'd like to give a quick overview of what each type of Haki generally does or is used for before getting into the history of Haki throughout the series. Conqueror's Haki allows one to overwhelm others using their own spirit, rendering them immobile or even knocking enemies out. Armament Haki allows one to strengthen their own physical body with their own spirit, allowing them to bolster their defenses or even bypass Devil Fruit abilities. Observation Haki allows one to sense the spirit and presence of others, giving them an ability to anticipate movement. Again, this is just a general overview of each color of Haki. There's much more nuance and advanced application of each that we'll get into later on. Haki is not very common outside of the Grand Line, specifically the Outer Seas, the East Blue, the West Blue, the North Blue, and the South Blue. Even in Paradise, the first half of the Grand Line, there are not many practitioners of Haki, as the island with the highest concentration of users we've seen so far is Amazon Lily. Though it has been stated that every Vice Admiral is capable of Haki. The New World, however, is full of Haki users, as we've seen throughout the Straw Hats Pirates' journeys today. It's been stated that everyone is capable of practicing either armament or observation Haki, though they must train in order to make use of it better. Some people, however, are born with this ability, such as the Shandian child Isa, or they have the natural talent for this ability, such as the late queen of Fishman Island Otohime. It is currently unknown if one can be born with Armament Haki in the same way, making it the only form of Haki that we have yet to see anyone be born with or naturally excel at, as Conqueror's Haki is something that cannot be taught and requires you to be born with it to begin with. It has also been shown that people can awaken their Haki during times of great distress or shock, as seen with Kobe during the Marineford arc. Conqueror's Haki, however, is very rare, having said to be found in only 1 in a few million people. As of this video, there are only 18 known Conqueror's Haki users out of over 1,000 named characters in the series, though of course, the world of One Piece is inhabited by much more. It's been stated that one can advance their Haki during extreme use in battle, with engagement against opponents with stronger Haki leading to greater leaps in one's own ability to use their own. This largely explains Luffy's fast-paced mastery of various applications of Haki across a short amount of time in the New World. Also of note, Haki is not a function of one's physical ability, but rather of one's own spirit or willpower. This was shown during the Punk Hazard arc, when the personas of several Straw Hats are swapped due to Law's Op Fruit. Sanji was still able to make use of his own observation Haki, despite being in Nami's physical form. Furthermore, it seems each color of Haki can be exhibited during times when the user is not fully conscious. While the manga doesn't have a specific visual indicator for the usage of observation Haki, there are times when characters have shown the ability to be fully asleep while being able to react to the presence of others. We've seen this with Whitebeard against Ace, as well as with Big Mom against some of the Straw Hats. Of note, while it may not be explicitly observation Haki at play, Zoro has also exhibited a similar ability on many occasions, where he can awaken immediately from his sleep and engage in combat in the presence of an enemy. During the Dressrosa arc, after Chinja was knocked out unconscious by Luffy, The armament haki channeled in Chinjiao's head did not dissipate, resulting in the Colosseum ring to be destroyed as his body fell. After his first bout with Kaido, Luffy appeared knocked out to Kaido's average crew members, though Kaido was able to sense Luffy's intent despite this. This was proven when Luffy let out an unconscious burst of Conqueror's Haki, knocking out several Animal Kingdom pirates who couldn't withstand Luffy's unconscious spirit. Ultimately, it's been stated by Kaido that Haki is truly the top skill in the world of One Piece, citing Roger's feat of ruling the seas as Pirate King despite not having any Devil Fruit abilities for himself. Despite this, Haki is still finite. We've seen Luffy overexert himself using Gear 4th and being unable to use Haki again for 10 minutes afterwards. Though Gear 4 primarily makes use of Armament Haki to coat oneself, we've also gotten an explanation that Haki in general is finite from Luffy's long battle with Katakuri, and this was seemingly confirmed with Brulee's reaction to Luffy's comments. Now, before we get into a more depth breakdown of each color of Haki, I think it's fruitful to go through how Haki was hinted at or portrayed in early parts of One Piece. At the current point in the story, Haki is everywhere, but it wasn't always like this. The first exhibition of Haki actually took place in Chapter 1, when Shanks used his Conqueror's Haki to drive off the Lord of the Coast. Later on, during the Baratier arc, we as readers got our first hint at the notion of a means of combating Devil Fruit users, when Krieg presumed Zeph's logbook held a secret for dealing with such people. While this sounds a lot like an application of Armament Haki, this could also have been a hint at the idea of Sea Stone, which we would later see in the use for the first time during the Logtown arc. The first documented usage of the phrase Haki is believed to be in Jaya, when Blackbeard makes note of Luffy's Haki. However, this was omitted in the English Viz translation, likely because the idea of Haki was not expounded upon until much later on in the series. The translator of the time, who mind you is not the current translator, may have thought that this was just some flavorful language or something that's not necessarily of importance. However, this has caused a great loss of nuance in Blackbeard's comments. In their initial exchange, the reader is led to believe Blackbeard can't believe Luffy would have a 30 million berry bounty, and this is retained in the English Viz translation. But later on toward the end of the Jaya arc, when we come to find out Luffy has actually acquired a 100 million berry bounty, we learn through the Japanese text that Blackbeard's initial disbelief at Luffy's bounty was because he thought it to be too low for a man with such Haki. The significance of this line was completely reversed in the English Viz translation, causing many readers of the time to believe Blackbeard didn't think much of Luffy at all, when in reality he had gauged Luffy's Haki from their initial exchange. As such, in retrospect, this is technically the first appearance of observation Haki in the manga. Soon after, we would be introduced to the concept of mantra in the Skypiea arc during Satori's Ordeal of Balls, where it was framed as a blessing or a gift, as opposed to the innate ability that we later come to know it as. Much later on, Silver's Rayleigh reveals mantra is just what observation Haki is called among the people of Skypiea. During this arc, Gonfall explains mantra as the ability to listen to the voices naturally emitted by humans, voice being used here in a metaphorical sense, as a stand-in for something like a human's presence or spirit. He also explains that Enel has a far greater ability to use this power, which we later learn is due to his use of his observation Haki in conjunction with his Rumble Rumble fruit. Later on, during the post-Enies Lobby arc, Garp uses his Fist of Love to physically damage Luffy with a blunt force. Many fans have long since conflated this to be the first depiction of Armament Haki in the series. However, Oda has never confirmed this. In the Volume 62 SBS Corner, when asked whether the Fist of Love is an application of Haki, Oda states this instance to be quote-unquote love. It should be noted, while this event in Chapter 431 happened before the formal explanation of Haki by Rayleigh in Chapter 597, this answer was featured after Chapter 610 in Volume 62, so there would be no need for Oda to play coy about what Haki was at this time. Obviously, Garp has been shown to use Armament Haki throughout the series, and even shown to have Armament Haki well before this event in Chapter 431, though I felt it was important to point out this misconception held across the fandom. In the same arc, we get our first explicit look at the use of Conqueror's Haki on humans, by Shanks on Whitebeard's weaker crew members. Though here it was simply referred to as Haki Power by Whitebeard. It was also here that we got our first hint at what happens when two users of Conqueror's Haki clash, noted by onlookers as splitting the sky itself. With the Sabaody Archipelago arc, Haki starts to become more of a known quantity in the series. When attacked by Duval and his bison, Motobaro, Luffy unknowingly immobilizes the beast, much like Shanks did in the very first chapter. This is the first sign of Luffy's latent Conqueror's Haki. Later on in the arc, we're introduced to Silver's Rayleigh after he uses his Conqueror's Haki to knock out the owner of the slave auction house, Disco, stopping him from harassing and assaulting the mermaid Kami. The Elbaf giant Stanson calls out Rayleigh and refers to this as Haki here. This is the first depiction in the series of using Conqueror's Haki with specificity and precision, rather than as indiscriminately affecting everyone with a weaker will around the user. The first canonical depictions of Armament Haki wouldn't come until the Sabaody Archipelago arc. Of course, we as readers wouldn't come to learn that this was Haki until a bit later on in the series, but it is interesting to note that the first two depictions of Armament Haki in this arc are actually advanced applications of Armament Haki, which we'll talk about in detail in the following segments. At the slave auction house, Rayleigh uses a special advanced application of Armament Haki to remove the explosive collar from Kami, freeing her without any harm. Later on, we meet Sentomaru, who is able to use another advanced application of Armament Haki in order to damage Luffy. Luffy even exclaims that there is something particular about Sentomaru's attacks. Soon after, we see Rayleigh physically clash with Kizaru, showcasing Armament Haki's base ability to allow one to interact with Devil Fruit users, specifically in this case making Logia users tangible. Not only does he do it with his own body, but also an external object, like a sword. We would get further explanation on how to imbue objects with Haki during the Amazon Lily arc, as Margaret explained the Kuja's arrows were imbued with Haki to increase their destructive capabilities. Though, it should be noted, this is the first time we saw objects that the user does not maintain contact with being imbued with Haki. A bit later on in this arc, we once again see an advanced application of Armament Haki used by Boa Marigold to deflect Luffy's Gum Gum stamp, followed by a strike from the Haki-imbued staff. Boa Sonya then constricts Luffy with her tail, pointing out Luffy's inability to use Haki. She then proceeds to dodge all of Luffy's attacks by utilizing her observation Haki. Eventually, Luffy unknowingly lets out a burst of Conqueror's Haki for the first time, after being angered by the Kuja's decision to kill Margaret for aiding Luffy. This knocks out several Kuja tribe members among the crowd. This was the first instance of the color of Supreme King being named, as well as the first instance of any color of Haki being named in general. Later during the Impel Down arc, Luffy would exhibit this power once again, in an attempt to save a friend, Bon Clay, by knocking out a pack of wolves. And when encountered, Blackbeard would use his observation Haki to sense that Luffy's Haki had gotten stronger since their last meeting. We see an array of Haki being used by various combatants during the Marineford arc, though the most notable of which was Luffy's use of Conqueror's Haki to once again save a comrade, this time his brother Ace. This would knock out the Executioners, as well as several combatants on the battlefield, all the while alerting to the world that Luffy's dangerous. Noticeably, it is implied here that Ace has this power as well, which would be confirmed during the Ace Sabo Luffy flashback. We also see that the three admirals form a barrier of Haki to protect the execution platform from Whitebeard's attack, though this was not detailed at all, and was a connection the reader had to make in retrospect after learning of a more advanced Haki technique later on in the series. And as mentioned earlier, this is where Kobe would awaken his observation Haki as well. This all leads to the end of part 1 of the series, with Haki finally getting a formal explanation given by Rayleigh, and Luffy trains for 2 years in order to better understand the 3 colors of Haki. From this point onwards, we would get more and more explicit references and visual cues for Haki. You see, throughout part 1, there are not really any visual indicators for Haki of any color, the most explicit signs being the blank eyes and foaming mouths when a character is knocked out by Conqueror's Haki. This may lead readers to believe Oda had not necessarily fleshed out the concept until much later on in the series, and I think that's definitely a possibility. However, there is an interesting read to be had here. Our perspective of the vast world of One Piece is largely informed by the perspective of Luffy and his crew. Since most of Part 1 takes place in the East Blue, and the first half of the Grand Line, our protagonists would not encounter Haki very often, and as such, they would not have a great understanding of Haki even being used if it happened right in front of them, as we've seen. I think part of why we start getting visual indicators for Armament Haki and Conqueror's Haki in Part 2 is because our protagonists are a lot more familiar with the concept of Haki by that point. As a result, we as readers start getting let in on the secret, so to speak. This is all conjecture, of course, but I do think there were seeds for what Haki would become planted throughout the early part of the series, such as Don Creek's comments about Zeph's logbook during the Baratie arc, as we've talked about. In Chapter 1, we saw Shanks use what would later become known as Conqueror's Haki, but there are a few other moments from early One Piece that are not explicitly Haki by any means, but I think it's really fun to consider when discussing just how much Oda had conceptualized at this time. One scene that has stuck with me is during the Little Garden arc, when Luffy sees through Mr. 3's wax mansion and is able to identify the real Mr. 3 among the numerous wax statues. And when asked how he did this, Luffy simply replies with, "Instinct." At the time, this read purely as a standard shonen writing trope, but it's really cool to think about this with the context of Haki. Observation Haki lets you sense the emotions and intent of others, something that Luffy has always excelled at, being able to see Zoro as a good person despite the rumors surrounding him, understanding Nami needed help despite her traitorous acts, and similarly with Robin during her alleged betrayal. Coupled with the idea that observation Haki lets you detect the presence of living beings, you can see how one would be able to pick out the real Mr. 3 among a group of inanimate statues. Now once again, I'm not saying this is explicitly observation Haki at play, but I'm rather pointing these out as parallels to what we know today. Another instance that I think is quite interesting to consider is Luffy's several bouts against Crocodile during the Alabasta arc. Initially, Luffy can't even get a hit in on Crocodile due to his Logia intangibility, but by the time of their second fight, Luffy realized he can use water to keep Crocodile's sand solid. We also get this scene where Crocodile wonders something about Luffy. The most direct read of this is Crocodile's looking at Luffy's hands, and beginning to think that Luffy figured out his weakness to being wet. And all things considered, I think that's probably the intent that Oda had at this time. But with all we know about Crocodile and Haki, it's fun to consider for a brief moment whether Crocodile had wondered if Luffy was using Armament Haki here. Of course, to this day, Crocodile has not been shown using Haki at all, but during the Marineford arc, we learned he was defeated by Whitebeard, and in Volume 78's SBS Corner, we learned this defeat was what made him look towards Alabasta. So while he may not have had Haki of his own by the time of Alabasta, it's not unreasonable to think he may have known about it. Although, again, this is all retrospective speculation. But this isn't even the point that I really wanted to get at. It's during the third and final clash between Luffy and Crocodile where Luffy uses his own blood to counteract Crocodile's intangibility. Now I'll qualify what I'm about to say by acknowledging that we are working in the medium of a manga, and thus we're limited to the colors in which we can use to portray things. But I think there's a very neat parallel to Armament Haki being visualized with the black coating, and one of the first attempts at combating Devil Fruits being visualized in a similar manner. There's also an interesting thought with regards to the various types of Haki being called colors in a black and white medium. It's almost as if in Part 1, we are purposely not meant to be able to see these colors of Haki, just as in real life how our perception of color is limited to a small portion of the electromagnetic spectrum. In theory, if we were able to expand our ability to perceive more wavelengths, we would be able to see more colors unknown to us previously. This is similar to how being able to understand what Haki is allows us to perceive the visual indicators of characters making use of it. The point of these observations was not to make some far-fetched reaches and to come to a definite conclusion, no. Rather, the point was to convey the notion that these ideas of how to combat Devil Fruit abilities, or in general how to streamline the logic for various superhuman abilities in the story, were something Oda had been playing around with in his head for a while. Taking it even further, during the Water 7 arc, we are introduced to the fighting style of the Six Powers, or Rokushiki, and many of these techniques mirror and likely inspired what we've seen is capable with Haki. For now, I just wanted to convey the idea that while explicit Haki is largely absent in the first part of the series, the fundamental concepts of what it accomplishes for the story has been there from the start. Now, let's take a deeper look at each color of Haki and its specific applications. The base application of observation Haki is to allow the user to sense other living beings. Now this can be done through various means, though the most common way of using observation Haki throughout the series has been sensing someone's presence, or in a figurative sense, their voice. We saw this explicitly first during the Skypiea arc with Mantra, though in hindsight, given Blackbeard's comments that Luffy had some Haki back in Jaya, we may have seen Luffy and Zoro exhibit some form of this in chapter 225, when they suspected there to be multiple people with Blackbeard. We would also get a glimpse of how this works in practice during the Dressrosa arc, where Usopp first unlocked his observation Haki when he saw the spirit of Luffy, Law, and Sugar at the palace, while Usopp was stationed all the way on the plateau. We see this again later on in the arc as we learn this is how Fujitora, despite being completely blind, sees others around him. Observation Haki can not only sense someone's presence, but also their intent or threat. This is how characters are able to predict enemy attacks and dodge accordingly. We first saw this explicitly during the Skypiea arc as well, with Enel and his priests using their mantra to prevent others from attacking them successfully. Beyond sensing someone's disposition for combat purposes, some users are capable of sensing the general emotions of living beings. Once again, we first saw this during the Skypiea arc, as Isa was said to feel the pain and tension of the people in her village. We got a more explicit look at this later on in the series with Kobe during the Marineford arc, and with Otohime during the Fishman Island arc as well. Later on, during the Whole Cake Island arc, we learned Rayleigh had pointed out that Luffy excelled at this, as we've seen him doing this on several occasions throughout the series. Also of note, Sanji also seems to excel at the specific application of observation Haki, which may even be heightened by his general lust for women, as we've seen throughout the series. There is one advanced application of observation haki in which the user can actually perceive the future briefly. Our first explicit depiction of this was with Katakuri during the Whole Cake Island arc, when he foresaw the organ dealer Jigra killing two of Beige's men, down to the detail of the very words that Jigra would say. In the manga, this is depicted as the user seeing future events in grayscale. Generally, we've seen observation haki synergizing with Devil Fruit abilities on a few occasions. The first instance being the aforementioned Rumble Rumble Fruit, allowing the user to extend the reach of their perceptive abilities. Though during the Whole Cake Island arc, we saw Katakuri make use of his Mochi Mochi Fruit to reshape his body in order to avoid future attacks. This created the illusion that he is impervious to even Armament Haki. Aside from the general limitations of Haki, observation Haki also requires immense concentration to maintain focus. This was explained in the Whole Cake Island arc by Katakuri, but we first saw this all the way back in Skypiea with Satori as well. As a narrative device, this works to explain any occasions where a given character is surprised or caught off guard, as it can be attributed to either a loss of concentration or too much fixation on one person, as we saw when Luffy did not detect Flambe's initial numbing needle during his fight with Katakuri. Furthermore, while observation haki is great at detecting the intent of living beings and their attacks, it doesn't work well to combat moves without any intent or attacks that come at random. This was first illustrated during Luffy's fight with Enel, when he started moving purely off reflex and launching attacks that would strike at random. Also, being able to perceive intent does not necessarily mean the user is fast enough to react in time, as we saw with Boa Sandersonia against Luffy in Gear 2nd. Similarly, being able to perceive the future does not necessarily mean the user can prevent or guarantee an outcome, as Luffy was still caught off guard by Kaido's strike despite looking into the future. We also saw during the Skypiea arc that observation haki may not be able to detect the presence of beings that are nested within one another. Enel was able to accurately count for the 6 remaining people, but failed to realize that Luffy was inside Nola, creating another person altogether. One misconception with observation haki is that it allows the user to sense one's surroundings as well as inanimate objects. However, this is only true with things that are acted upon by living beings, such as bullets. For example, the blind Fujitora used his cane sword for the traditional means of traversal and couldn't tell the result of a game at the casino. Fans often claim that an early hint at observation haki was Zoro's ability to perceive the breadth of the rocks and the trees around him, as well as his ability to sense his sword amongst the rubble back during the Alabasta arc. I've seen this idea be corroborated by the fact that this scene followed a flashback to Zoro learning about the ability to cut steel while being unable to cut paper, a phrase that would later come to be associated with Armament Haki, as it was used to explain an advanced application of it by Hyogoro during the Wano arc. While the ability to cut steel likely seems to be an application of Armament Haki, the ability to sense the breathing of one's environment does not really line up with our current understanding of observation Haki. To me, this sounds much more like the voice of all things, but we've really yet to get much detail on how that works in the series, and I don't really feel comfortable simply stating that this was the voice of all things or observation haki when it could just be nothing at all. We'll have to wait and see how the story develops further. However, I will note there are several times throughout the series where Zoro has been able to sense his various swords, as well as a more recent scene where Big Mom took note of the unusual nature of Zoro's Enma. There may actually be an explanation for this with observation haki involved. During Zoro's fight with King, he flashes back to a conversation with the blacksmith Shimosuke Kozaburo, where we learn that swords are made with the intent of murder, and that their creators put their efforts into making sure that they are as capable of that as possible. Now, this could be understood as the intent bestowed upon the blade by its creator, allowing others to perceive that sword's presence with observation haki. Perhaps its previous wielders also bestowed their perceivable intent within it, as Kaido noted Odin's presence within Enma as well, though this could have just been colorful language at play here. Note that this is also speculation. However, we did get a look at what Zoro's swords would look like if personified during Volume 92's SBS Corner, where Zoro's Wado Ichimonji bears a striking resemblance to his creator, Kozaburo. The base application of Armament Haki is to allow the user to strengthen their physical body with their spirit or willpower, which in turn can be used for both offensive and defensive purposes. As discussed earlier, this ability to harden one's exterior with Armament Haki was not detailed with any visual indicators until after the time skip. It's at this point in which this ability was depicted as a black coating around the hardened area, accompanied with the user calling out its usage. However, the verbal cue would appear less and less later on into the series, similar to how Luffy no longer calls out he is using Gear 2nd or Gear 3rd. In some cases, the use of Armament Haki is accompanied with lightning, especially during a clash between two users. The visual indicators started becoming prominent around the Dressrosa arc, with some initial depictions featuring white lightning, though since then, the lightning's color has been more consistently been black. There is a misconception among some fans that black lightning is solely reserved for the depiction of Conqueror's Haki, but it seems to just indicate a large use of Haki in general. We have seen this black coating feature a hint of color depending on its user, as indicated by the cover of Volume 89, with Luffy being depicted as slightly red and Katakuri being depicted as slightly blue. A handful of users have also been depicted with their Armament Haki coating taking on a flame-like pattern, such as when Luffy uses Gear 4 or Katakuri uses his Buzzcut Mochi. As previously discussed, Armament Haki allows one to combat Logia users and render their bodies tangible. This was first shown with Rayleigh against Kizaru during the Sabaody arc. However, it seems they can be used to counteract or withstand the abilities of Paramecia users as well. This was suggested during the Punk Hazard arc, when both Tashigi and Virgo assumed their Haki was strong enough to fight against Law, though they were both proven wrong. Though we would see this during the Wano arc, when Law admits his Op fruit powers are unable to teleport Big Mom and Kaido due to their intense Haki. Law would actually make use of this application of Haki during the Egghead arc to break through the abilities of Dakyu's Sick fruit. Armament Haki can also be used to imbue objects other than the user's body. We first saw this during the Sabaody arc, with Rayleigh's sword being able to cut through Kizaru's Glint powers. Now, this can also be done with objects that do not maintain direct contact with the user, as we saw with the Kuja tribe's Haki-infused arrows. We've also been shown that some Devil Fruit users are able to imbue Armament Haki when using techniques that never make contact with the user at all, as we saw with Doflamingo's Everwhite, or Katakuri's Power Mochi. There's also this idea of imbuing swords with Armament Haki to prevent them from chipping or being broken, as explained by Mihawk. This implies that black blades are the result of imbuing a great amount of Armament Haki to a sword over time, to the point where it retains that imbuement. Our first hint of the caliber of a black blade was with Mihawk's Yoru, first introduced during the Baratie arc, which technically may make this the first appearance of Armament Haki in the series. We would be introduced to the second black blade of the series later on during the Thriller Bark arc with Ryuma's Shisui, and Zoro would first hint at a black blade's durability after he was bestowed the sword by Ryuma. Before moving on to a few advanced applications of Armament Haki, I'd like to address a recent popular misconception. That being the idea that Ryuo is a specific application of Armament Haki. Ryuo is actually just what the people of Wano call Armament Haki, very similar to how Mantra is what the people of Skypiea call Observation Haki. When this notion of Ryuo was first brought up during the Wano arc, many people misconstrued what was being said, whether that was due to a poor scanlation or the ambiguity in the explanation of itself. Hyogoro notices Luffy is holding back his punches, which Luffy explains as him trying to deliver a blow without physically touching the enemy, and says that this is an application of Armament Haki. Hyogoro does not understand what the word Haki means, but he's very familiar with this idea that Luffy's describing. He makes the connection that this type of Haki is what they call Ryo in Wano. Many readers took this to mean that the ability to attack without making contact is Ryuo. However, we learn throughout this arc that Ryuo is just the notion of Armament Haki itself. We see this when the scabbards pierce through Kaido's flesh with their swords, making direct physical contact, while Kaido wonders if they're using Ryo akin to Odin's. If Ryo was specifically the practice of delivering a blow without making physical contact, it wouldn't be used to describe their attacks here. And I've seen people claim that Ryo is still the specific application of Haki, citing Hyogoro's unfamiliarity with the outside concepts. However, Kaido here is likely not confusing anything, as he spent many years both inside and outside of Wano. That said, let's talk about this advanced application of Armament Haki a bit more. This is what has been popularly referred to as emission, and as stated before, it allows the user to let their Haki flow from their body without needing a physical medium. We saw this first with Sentomaru all the way back during the Sabaody arc, when Luffy noted that there was something strange about his attacks. Luffy sought to learn this application when he realized that his base usage of Armament Haki was not enough to defeat Kaido. Now, not only do people mistakenly refer to this application as Ryuo, they think there's something specific to the people of Wano, when in reality, we've seen this used by way more outsiders throughout the series. Boa Marigold exhibited this on Amazon Lily. The original admirals used this to defend against Whitebeard's attack. Rayleigh was shown using this when he was teaching Haki. Luffy mastered this. Roger and Whitebeard exhibited this during their clash. Big Mom was shown using this on Wano as well, and most recently, Garp has been shown emitting this with his Galaxy Impact. There's another advanced application of Armament Haki which allows the user to destroy an enemy from within, popularly referred to as internal destruction. This was demonstrated by Rayleigh during the Sabaody arc, and this scene was expounded upon later during the Wano arc. This application has been shown to be very effective against explosive collars and handcuffs. Internal destruction is currently one of the rarest applications of Haki in the series, as so far as only Rayleigh and Luffy have been shown to be able to use it. Armament Haki is finite, as previously described, but there are a few other limitations as well. While Haki stems from the strength of one's spirit, it does not necessarily protect the user from being overpowered by pure physical strength, as seen when the Boa sisters were overwhelmed by Luffy's Gear 2nd, despite them using Armament Haki. We recently saw this during the Wano arc, when Queen explained that even those who have mastered Armament Haki can succumb to eternal damage from pressure. The final and most rare color of Haki is that of Conquerors. It's been said several times throughout the series that those who can practice this color of Haki have the qualities of a king, though what exactly that means has been up to interpretation. While observation and armament Haki can be improved through practice and training, Rayleigh has stated that the only way to improve one's Conqueror's Haki is to improve their own strength. It should also be noted that the Ha in Haki, in reference to hegemony or sovereign dominance, is also the same Ha found in this type of Haki's original Japanese name, Hao. The base application of this color of Haki is to impose one's spirit or will upon the wills of others. The extent to which this is done results in various outcomes for a given enemy. For example, we've seen this used to command and tame various beasts, such as with Lord of the Coast in Chapter 1, or potentially even the giant kraken Sarume on the Straw Hat's descent to Fishman Island. We have also seen Conqueror's Haki even strike fear into humans, as explicitly demonstrated by Shanks against Ryokogyu in Wano, even from a great distance. And in hindsight, we've seen Zoro do something similar against Monet all the way back in Punk Hazard, which at the time we thought simply to be Zoro's fearsome demeanor. Though Tashigi claims Zoro didn't use Haki here, she's referring specifically to him refraining from using the Armament Haki to cut Monet in half and kill her. We've also seen this ability taken a bit further, going to the point of knocking out enemies completely. This seems to be the most common usage of Conqueror's Haki. We first saw this during the post-Enies Lobby arc, when Shanks incapacitated many of Whitebeard's men just by walking by them. We later saw during the Sabaody arc that this ability can be used with specificity. This was further explained during Volume 65's SBS Corner. Now, while Conqueror's Haki can be used to overwhelm people, it can also be used to physically impact the environment. This was seen with Shanks on Whitebeard's ship, as his Haki damaged the very ship itself. Furthermore, when two Conqueror's Hakis uses clash, the effect on the environment can be quite harsh, causing bursts of Haki and great winds to blow away people, objects, and even faraway clouds. Black lightning dissipates from the users, and can often be larger than the very island they're standing on. We first saw this in Dressrosa with Don Chinjao and Luffy, and once more with Luffy and Doflamingo. The pure pressure of this Haki often affects the very sky itself, splitting it in two. This has been shown a few times throughout the series. Most notably was with Luffy and Kaido, though, as the sky splitting allowed the clouds to clear and reveal the moon, proving useful for the Mink tribe and their Sulong ability. There is an advanced application of Conqueror's Haki, though this ability is quite rare, as suggested by Kaido. Much like Armament Haki, Conqueror's Haki can be infused as well into both body parts and external objects, and when this is done, the black lighting emanates from the infused body part or object. This was first seen explicitly by Kaido and his Ragnaraku attack. Now, in Volume 4 Billion, a volume accompanying Film Red, it was stated that Shanks is the advanced application of Conqueror's Haki known as observation killing. As of now, very little is known about this technique other than it prevents enemies from looking into the future with observation Haki by concealing the user's own spirit or presence. Perhaps this is how Shanks has been able to seemingly appear out of nowhere across the series, by concealing his own presence. Now that's about it for the general knowledge surrounding Haki and the various colors, but I'd like to talk about some of the potential manifestations of Haki. There's a few additional instances or techniques from across the series that I think could be Haki in some shape or form, but please note that this is all just fun theory crafting from my time with the series and the fandom across the years. As such, this should not be taken as any sort of objective fact. Out of everything that I'm about to suggest, I think this is the one that has the most potential to become a canon, and that's the idea that Nami has Haki, and not just some Haki, all the colors of Haki. Throughout the series, we've seen Nami do certain things that are achievable through the use of one type of Haki or another. Oftentimes, these are painted as gags, but this wouldn't be the first time Oda had been veiling story developments as gags. There are likely countless examples of this, but a few of note, Nami has been shown on several occasions to be able to physically hurt Luffy. Luffy shouldn't be able to take damage from regular blows. Not only that, she's also been shown to be able to hurt Zoro and Sanji as well, even outside the context of a gag during the Whole Cake Island arc, leaving a bit of a mark on Sanji's face. Now, this whole idea was explained in Volume 43's SBS Corner, when Oda said her punches are effective because of her compassion. This is very similar to Oda's explanation for Garp's Fist of Love, Though, there is a world where you can liken these compassionate attacks to Armament Haki, where one augments their physical abilities with their own spirit or will. Nami has also been shown to have an uncanny ability to predict the weather and navigate the seas. On one occasion, Vivi even described it as Nami feeling the weather from within. This treads in very similar territory to how observation Haki could be used. And lastly, and most recently, Nami has been shown in such anger towards Luffy that she stunned Jinbei with fear. Jinbei even wondered if this was Conqueror's Haki. Of course, this was likely just a gag, but the fact that Oda drew the black lightning here is very interesting. At this point, I wouldn't be surprised if we learned she has some color of Haki in the series. Another interesting candidate for Haki is Chopper. His use of his scope technique to detect a weakness in the enemy, it borders on the abilities of observation Haki. However, what made this particularly interesting to me in recent years is the fact that the crosshairs for this technique remind me a lot of when Usopp's awakening of observation Haki occurred. Of course, the crosshairs in that scene could have just been from Usopp's goggles, but he was depicted with the crosshairs right before the Dressrosa arc as well, and that time they were outside of his body, similar to Chopper's scope. I'll also add, Luffy has also been depicted using these imaginary crosshairs when he was trying to return fire with his Gum Gum Fire salute during the Punk Hazard arc. There may be nothing here, but I think it's just kind of interesting. During the Skypiea arc, Enel had predicted that by the end of a 3-hour period, there would be only 5 people left standing, and he was sort of correct. This could obviously just be Enel being overconfident and willing to make that outcome become true regardless of if he was wrong, but it is kind of fun to think about this in the present day with the context of Future Sight. Sort of in the same vein, Charlie from Fishman Island also had the ability to predict the future, all the way out to a year, and she appeared to have a really good track record. It'll be interesting to see how her prediction about a man in the straw hat plays out, but I wouldn't hate that if this turns out to be a particularly strong form of observation Haki. While we're discussing Future Sight, during the Marineford War, Luffy foresees a vision of his hand being cut off by Mihawk. While the ability to see the future wouldn't be introduced much later on in the series, it is kind of interesting how similar this instance is. And another one of my favorites on this list is Elizabella's King Punch. Elizabella had an ability that had been boasted to destroy an entire enemy fortress, and it could even take down an Emperor of the Sea, potentially. When used in full power, we see its destructive capability of being able to knock out almost everyone in Elizabella's Colosseum block. With our present-day understanding of Armament and Conqueror Haki, this move just reminds me a lot of some form of one or the other. And it's even depicted with the Black Lightning. See, we know that it doesn't require physical contact with its targets, much like some advanced applications of Haki, and if nothing else, being stated to potentially take down an Emperor feels like this technique has a small preview or a foreshadow of what Oda had in mind for Luffy later on in the story. Beside Elizabella in this panel is Chinjao with his Hashoken. Hashoken is a fighting style from the Chinjao family that is based on using vibrations and causing shockwaves to fight. We've seen this be quite powerful, especially in conjunction with Armament Haki, and I see some similarities here with the advanced applications of emission or internal destruction, using the medium of vibrations in the air to do internal damage. Alright, that's enough fun. We'll have plenty more time to theorycraft in future videos. I wanted to make this video primarily to just go through a lot of my thoughts and observations on Haki, as well as try to help clear up any misconceptions that have been floating around the community throughout the years. I think Haki is a really cool power system, and I think it's been set up in a really cool way, seeded in early parts, and you can tell Oda's been thinking about a lot of these ideas for quite a long time, and I'm excited to see what he throws at us next. Hey, I just want to take the last minute of this video to say from the bottom of my heart, thank you for watching this, and thank you for watching the last video. We hit over 1,000 views within a week, and that blew my expectations out of the water. See, when I put that out, I really thought I'd be lucky to hit like 30 views in that time frame. I don't know if this video is going to do as well, but regardless, I'm going to continue to put out this sort of content, and I'll be covering the live action as well as going into topics that I think are interesting within the manga. I'm going to keep this cadence of a video every week, and then I'll also try to do a breakdown or discussion of each chapter that comes out with the manga when it comes back from the break in a couple of weeks. Once again, thank you guys so much, and I appreciate all the engagement. The video really snowballed in the last few days because of that, and if you like what I'm doing with this channel, I'd really appreciate the whole like, comment, and subscribe thing. Also, your feedback is great. I still have a long way to go with improving these videos, but for the time being, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.